He never planned to run for office, but the letters kept coming. From dying hospitals, broken schools, forgotten families. Keanu Reeves stood at the mic with one choice: walk away or carry the weight of a nation's hope. What he said next stunned the world and ignited a movement no one saw coming. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. They came by the hundreds at first, then thousands. The Foster Files inbox, once a slow trickle of survivor stories and reunion letters, became a flood. Every day brought more: typed emails, scanned documents, photos, handwritten notes, mailed increased envelopes. Sophia tried to filter them, but the task became impossible. "Keanu," she said one morning, holding a stack of printed pages, "you need to read these." He took them into his office, expecting more of what he'd grown used to: foster youth accounts, staff testimonies, lost connections. But what he found was something else. A woman in Ohio wrote, "My husband died waiting for surgery that kept getting delayed. When I asked why, the nurse whispered, 'We ran out of staffing months ago.' I buried him with our mortgage overdue. I don't know how to tell my son we have to leave the house." A man in Colorado sent a picture of his eviction notice, taped beside a framed diploma. "I taught math for 18 years. Budget cuts wiped our district. I've been living in my car since August." A single mother from Georgia wrote, "My daughter has diabetes. Her insulin copay went from $30 to $300 overnight. I skipped mine so she could have hers. Then I passed out on the bus." There were veterans writing from shelters, nurses detailing supply shortages, high school students who had become caregivers to their younger siblings. The topics varied, but the pattern was undeniable. The system wasn't bending. It was breaking. Keanu read until his eyes burned. He read until the light in the window shifted from morning to dusk. And then he kept reading. By evening, there was a stack beside him nearly a foot high. Sophia knocked gently on the door and peeked in. "Still going?" Keanu nodded slowly. She stepped inside and sat across from him. "They don't just want help," she said. "They want to be heard." He picked up one letter, slightly crumpled, the ink faded near the edges. "They're not asking for much," he said. "They're asking for someone to care. Publicly, persistently, without flinching." Sophia leaned forward, her voice quiet. "These aren't just cries for help. They're calls to lead." He didn't respond right away, but something in his expression shifted, like the weight had finally settled in a place he couldn't ignore. That night, Keanu couldn't sleep. He sat at his kitchen table, a mug of cold coffee beside him, the apartment silent except for the soft hum of traffic far below. The letters stayed with him. Not the numbers, but the names, the images, the details too specific to forget. He thought about the mother rationing insulin in a city filled with billion-dollar buildings, the teacher sleeping in her car while her old school handed out awards, the veteran who wrote, "I served 2 tours overseas, but when I came back, I couldn't even get an appointment." He tried to write, just to get it out, but the words wouldn't come. So he put on his coat and stepped outside. The city at night wasn't loud, but it wasn't silent either. Every sound echoed with purpose: the hiss of steam from a subway grate, the rattle of a cart pushed by someone collecting bottles, a siren wailing several blocks away, then fading. Keanu walked without destination. He passed a boarded-up health clinic, a tent pitched beside a church, a woman curled against a heating vent using a folded newspaper as a blanket. He paused, knelt, and gently tucked a $20 bill into her shoe. She didn't stir. Further down the street, a mural caught his eye. It was painted on a red brick wall. A child with outstretched hands. The words beside it read, "The future is waiting. Are you listening?" He stood there for a long time. When he turned back, he noticed a bus stop bench nearby. A man sat hunched forward, head bowed. Keanu approached, slowly. "Hey," he said gently. "You okay?" The man looked up. His face was sunburnt, his beard uneven, but his eyes were clear. "You're him?" the man said, "from the videos." Keanu didn't answer. He didn't have to. The man nodded toward the mural. "That line's for you, I think." Keanu glanced at the wall again. "I'm not a leader," he said quietly. "You're already leading," the man replied. "You just haven't said it out loud yet." They sat together in silence for a few minutes. Then Keanu stood, offered a nod, and continued walking. By the time he got home, dawn was breaking. He walked to his desk, opened a notebook, and wrote one sentence across the top of a blank page. "This is no longer a ripple, it's a wave." Later that morning, Keanu returned to the foster files office. The team was already there, sorting messages, making coffee, trying to manage the avalanche of human stories arriving by the hour. Sophia handed him another stack, hesitating. "This one's heavier." Keanu took the pile and sat at the long table in the back room. He opened the first envelope and read a letter from a social worker in rural Texas. "Last year I lost 4 kids, not to death, but to disappearance. The system couldn't track them. One day they were in foster homes, the next, no paperwork, no answers. I asked too many questions, they told me to stop. I resigned instead. I carry their names every day." The second letter came from a teenager in South Carolina. "I live with my grandma because my mom OD'd. They keep saying, we don't qualify for help. But I'm 17 and I'm working full-time while trying to finish school. I don't want charity, I just want a life." By the third letter, Keanu had to stop. He stood, walked to the window, and watched the city breathe. It was all there, in front of him. Not a crisis in pieces, a nation unraveling at the seams, quietly, slowly, until people forgot it was ever stitched together. Sophia joined him, her voice barely above a whisper. "You've done more than anyone expected. But maybe it's time to do something no one expected." He looked at her. "These aren't just stories," he said. "They're signals." She nodded. "So what's the next step?" He didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, he pulled out his phone and began drafting a reply. Not to one person, but to everyone. It wasn't a campaign statement. It wasn't polished. Just one sentence. "I hear you." He didn't post it, not yet. But he saved it. Because deep down, Keanu knew these letters weren't going to stop. Not because people were desperate, but because, for the first time in a long time, someone was finally listening. The town wasn't large, just under 8,000 residents. A quiet main street with a diner, a gas station, a courthouse, and a church. It didn't make headlines, didn't host national debates, didn't trend online. But the stories lived there too. Keanu arrived without announcement. No cameras, no press release, no entourage, just Malik behind the wheel and Sophia riding shotgun. They pulled into the gravel lot outside the local community center, a building with chipped paint and a faded banner that read, "Monthly Town Forum, open to all." Inside, a circle of folding chairs had already formed. Maybe 20 people sat scattered around, some holding papers, others just waiting. A whiteboard leaned against the wall with a handwritten agenda. At the top it read, "Healthcare, housing, local policing." No one made a fuss when Keanu walked in. A few eyes widened, one man nudged his wife. A teenage boy whispered something and reached for his phone, but quickly put it down. Keanu nodded politely and sat in an empty chair in the back. The moderator, a school principal in her 50s, raised her eyebrows but said nothing. She simply opened the meeting with the usual line, "Let's keep it respectful and real." A man stood first, broad shoulders, weathered hands. His voice cracked. "My son was killed in a traffic stop last year," he said. "The officer said he matched a description. My son was 17. Never even had a parking ticket. He was reaching for his wallet." No one interrupted, no one looked away. The man continued, quieter now. "They said it was a mistake, a misunderstanding. But I buried him. There's no misunderstanding about that." He sat down. His wife reached for his hand, and they both stared at the floor. A nurse stood next. "I work at the regional hospital," she said. "We ran out of gloves in January. Gloves, and the admin told us to reuse what we could. I've watched coworkers cry in the supply closet because we couldn't protect ourselves, let alone our patients." She looked around the room, then down at her own hands. "We're one flu season away from collapse." A silence followed, not heavy, but respectful, as if everyone knew these words weren't new, just long ignored. Keanu leaned forward slightly in his seat. He hadn't come to speak. He came to absorb. Next came a man in uniform, older, maybe mid-60s. His posture was straight, but his eyes were tired. His name tag read E. Granger, USMC, retired. He cleared his throat. "I served in 3 tours, Desert Storm, Kosovo, and Iraq. Came home, went through the usual stuff, a few surgeries, some nerve damage, PTSD. He tapped the side of his head lightly. "That's the one they don't put on the paperwork." People nodded. "I applied for assistance through the VA. Waited 7 months for an appointment. When I finally saw someone, they gave me pills, then sent me home." He paused. "I don't remember anyone asking if I was okay. I don't think they had the time." He looked down. "Now I sit in my trailer most days, eating canned soup and watching my buddies' names roll through obituary notices. Some from illness, some from things we don't talk about. And I just keep wondering, was this what we fought for?" A long silence followed. Keanu didn't move. His jaw tightened just slightly. A young woman stood next, late 20s, holding a toddler in her arms. The little girl had mismatched shoes and clutched a soft toy with one eye missing. "I'm a single mom," she said simply. "Work part-time at the diner. I get tips when the place is full, but that's not often." She shifted her daughter to her hip. "I applied for housing assistance last year, got put on a waiting list. I asked how long it might take. They told me, maybe 18 months. I said, my lease ends in 2. They said, we're sorry." She laughed softly, not from humor. "My landlord raised the rent anyway, so now every month I make a choice, rent or food." She looked at her daughter. "I usually pick rent, but I lie and say dinner's coming later." Someone handed her a tissue. She nodded her thanks. Then an older woman spoke. She was quiet, calm, the kind of person who usually stayed after meetings to stack chairs. "I've been a teacher for 42 years, and last month I thought about quitting." She looked around the room. "Because I can't keep watching kids show up with empty stomachs and hollow eyes. I can't keep pretending test scores matter when the children sitting in front of me are just trying to survive." She sighed. "I don't want to quit, but I also don't want to keep pretending this is normal." The moderator opened the floor one last time. No one else stood, but the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like the space between waves, quiet but full of power. Then someone from the back raised a hand. A teenage boy, maybe 16, hoodie pulled over his head, nervous energy in his foot tapping the floor. "I wasn't going to say anything," he began. "But I guess I will." He stood slowly. "My mom works nights, 2 jobs. I take care of my little brother after school. We don't have a car, so I walk him home, make dinner, then try to get my homework done. Sometimes I fall asleep at the table. Teachers tell me I need to focus more." A pause. "I'm trying. But no one ever asks what it's like to be tired before you even start your day." He looked around, then right at Keanu. "I've seen your stuff online, the videos, the shelters. I thought they were just Hollywood, you know? But you're sitting here." Keanu didn't speak. He simply nodded. The boy continued. "If you're here to listen, then thanks. Just don't stop listening when the cameras come." Someone clapped. Then another, not thunderous, but real. The meeting closed with no grand summary, just a quiet thank you and a promise to meet again. As people filtered out, a few stopped by Keanu's chair. One shook his hand. Another whispered, "Please don't forget us." The veteran placed his palm on Keanu's shoulder and said, "If you go forward, Go with everything, or don't go at all. Keanu walked out last. Outside, the sky was turning orange, the street was still, but his heart was full of movement. He didn't speak until they reached the car. Malik asked, "You okay?" Keanu looked down the road, eyes focused, voice low. "Avon didn't ask me to run." "No," Sophia said from the front seat. "But they asked you not to leave." Keanu didn't answer. He just stared out the window as they drove away, the community center growing smaller in the rearview mirror. But the voices? They stayed. The car ride back from the town hall was quiet. Sophia and Malik said little, respecting the silence Keanu had carried since leaving the community center. He stared out the window the entire trip, watching trees and buildings pass like ghosts of a country he used to think he understood. When they dropped him off at his apartment, he gave a tired wave and disappeared upstairs without a word. The next day, he turned off his phone. He canceled all meetings, ignored press requests, declined interviews. He needed space, not to escape the movement, but to feel it fully, to let the voices settle without distraction. No noise, no planning, just reflection. He pulled an old leather-bound journal from the bookshelf. Inside were pages filled with scribbled thoughts, half-sentences, late-night ideas. Most had been written long before the Foster files ever existed, back when he was still just a man trying to help a girl who'd fallen asleep in a library. He flipped past those entries until he reached the back, where he'd tucked a few things over the months. A faded printout of Danica's case file, Mariah's hand-drawn classroom sketch with the chalkboard that read, "Miss Mariah." Angela's letter, folded gently, the edges worn soft from being handled too many times. He read them all again, slowly. Then he closed the journal and sat at the table in silence. For a while, he just breathed, in and out, trying to make sense of the invisible thread connecting these people to one another. And to him. Later that afternoon, he stepped outside for a walk. No security, no destination. He wandered through streets that had become familiar, past closed clinics, shuttered storefronts, lines outside food banks. Eventually, he turned down a narrow service road that led to an overpass. Below it, a small homeless encampment had taken shape over the last year. Dozens of tents in various colors, tarps stretched between shopping carts, smoke curling from makeshift fire pits. Keanu approached slowly, not wanting to disturb anyone. He brought nothing but himself. A few heads turned. Some recognized him, some didn't. Then he saw her. A woman, maybe late 40s, crouched near a crate-turned stool, stirring something in a small pot. She wore layers, sweatshirt, scarf, jacket. But what caught Keanu's eye was the faded blue t-shirt peeking out from underneath it all. It had a logo on it, a cracked, worn version of the Foster files. Keanu stopped a few feet away. He didn't say anything right away. He just looked at the shirt. The way the letters had started to peel from too many washes, too much wear. But it was unmistakable. It was his project, his mission. Now here, worn not like a brand, but like armor. The woman looked up. Her eyes scanned his face, and then recognition flickered there. Not as awe, but as something quieter. "You're him," she said. He nodded. "Yeah." She smiled, not wide, not dramatic, just a soft, knowing expression that felt older than her face. "I got this shirt from a shelter 2 towns over," she said, adjusting the collar. "They handed them out with some supplies. Thought it was just another organization until I started reading the stories. One of them sounded like me." Keanu crouched, his elbows resting on his knees. What was the story? She stirred the pot again, her eyes lowering. Mom of 3, lost housing after her hours got cut, stayed with friends, then cars, then tents. She said she didn't blame the world, she just wished the world would look at her, even once. Keanu stayed silent. "I figured if someone's collecting stories like that," the woman continued, "maybe there's still someone out there who sees us." She looked at him directly now. "You're the only one who sees us." Keanu felt his throat tighten. He wanted to say something, but nothing felt right. The woman glanced over her shoulder, where a few kids chased each other between tents. Laughter bounced through the air, brief but bright. "You want some?" she asked, nodding to the pot. "It's just beans and broth, but it's warm." He shook his head gently. "Thank you." She handed him a spoon anyway. "In case you change your mind." He took it. They sat for a few more minutes, watching the fire burn low. Then she said, "You're not just collecting stories, are you?" He looked at her. "What makes you say that?" She shrugged. "You're not here to listen anymore. You're here because you know listening isn't enough." Keanu lowered his head slightly. She was right. He stood, thanked her, and started walking back the way he came. As he reached the sidewalk again, he turned around. She was watching him. He raised the spoon. She raised her hand in return. No words. Just a look between two people who understood exactly what had been said. That night, back in his apartment, Keanu moved slowly. He placed the spoon from the encampment gently on the counter like it was sacred. Then he sat at his kitchen table, turned off every light but one, and opened his journal again. He flipped past the old entries, past the letters, the photos, the press clippings, past the notes that had once mapped out a foundation, not a movement. Then he tore out a blank page and sat in the silence. Not a thinking silence, but a knowing one. The kind of quiet that wraps around a moment when you finally stop resisting what's already begun. He picked up a pen, not one he used often. This one had weight to it, a gift from someone years ago, long forgotten until now. And he wrote, not a speech, not a plan, just a sentence. What if this isn't about me at all? He looked at the words, let them breathe, because they were the truest thing he'd written in a long time. He tore the page out, folded it into quarters, and tucked it into his jacket pocket. It wasn't a declaration. It was a surrender to something larger than him, something louder than fear, something that no longer needed permission to move forward. It had already begun. Outside, the city kept humming, unaware that in a quiet kitchen above it, something had shifted in a way that would soon touch millions. Not with a roar, but with a whisper that refused to be ignored. The idea for the rally didn't come from Keanu. It started in a group chat among three women, an elementary school teacher, a shelter volunteer, and a former foster youth. What began as a plan to gather a few people at a local park quickly grew. Word spread. Other volunteers joined. Teachers posted flyers in their staff rooms. A few churches got involved. Then, a local union. Then a youth advocacy nonprofit. Within a week, a spontaneous event was unfolding in downtown Detroit. They called it a unity rally. No one asked Keanu to headline. They didn't want a celebrity. They wanted a listener, a witness. So they extended an invitation with modest expectations. To everyone's surprise, he accepted. He arrived quietly, dressed in jeans, boots, and a dark coat. No staff, no stage crew, just Sophia and Malik trailing behind, helping coordinate from a respectful distance. The park overflowed. People lined up at food trucks and folding chairs. Some stood holding handmade signs with phrases like, "Lead with compassion," and "We're not invisible anymore." Others came simply to be present, wrapped in blankets and hope. Children played near the back. A portable speaker system echoed soft music through the crowd. There was no glitz, no manufactured drama, just community. The rally opened with poetry, followed by a few short speeches from local workers. A nurse described the fear of having to reuse PPE. A pastor talked about the increase in food insecurity among seniors. A teenage boy shared what it felt like to grow up in foster care, always wondering when the next goodbye would come. Keanu stood off to the side, listening, taking it all in. He had declined to speak. He told Sophia he wanted the rally to belong to the people, and for the first hour, that's exactly what it was. Then a young girl stepped up to the mic. She looked no older than 11, small frame, nervous hands. She unfolded a crumpled piece of paper and adjusted the microphone slowly. Her voice, when it came, was soft but clear. She began to read a poem. It was about shadows and silence, about being told she was too much for one home and not enough for another, about watching friends disappear into the system, about wishing the world would stop long enough to ask how she was doing. Then she reached the last line. If only someone would lead us. And the entire park fell still. For a few moments, no one moved. The words, "If only someone would lead us," echoed softly through the speakers, hanging in the cool afternoon air like breath in winter. The girl lowered her poem and stepped back from the mic, eyes searching the crowd for reassurance. A woman nearby, likely her foster mother, held out her arms, and the girl rushed into them, burying her face into her chest. The applause didn't come right away. Instead, there was a stillness, the kind that comes not from hesitation, but from reverence. Then someone clapped, then another. Slowly, the park erupted in a wave of soft, rising sound. Claps, sniffles, shouts of "You were amazing," and "Thank you, sweetheart." Keanu remained still. Sophia turned to him, her eyes wet. Malik whispered, "You need to go up there." Keanu didn't answer, but he was already moving. He walked to the edge of the crowd, then toward the platform where the speakers had stood. The MC saw him approaching and stepped aside without a word. Keanu climbed the 3 wooden steps to the mic. He didn't touch it at first. He just stood there. The crowd fell quiet again. Even the kids in the back paused their game. Keanu looked out, not at cameras because there were none, not at handlers because they hadn't come, just people, faces, some familiar, most not, all waiting. He placed his hands on either side of the podium and exhaled through his nose. 30 seconds passed. Nothing, not a word. But something was happening. In that silence, people began leaning forward. Hearts already open from the poetry, the testimony, the truth. They weren't waiting for a hero. They were waiting to see if he was willing to carry what they'd all laid down. Keanu's eyes scanned the front rows. He saw the pastor, the teenager, the little girl sitting now in her foster mother's lap, her poem folded neatly in her hands like it was scripture. And then he spoke. His voice was low. "You know," he began, "when I got here today, I wasn't planning to speak." He paused. "I thought it was enough just to listen, and for a while it was." He looked down at the wooden platform beneath him. But something about that last line, it broke me. In a good way. He looked up again, straighter now. "Because I've been waiting too? I've been waiting for someone else to step in," Keanu continued. "Someone smarter, someone with political experience, someone who knew how to navigate the storm without getting swallowed by it." He paused again, letting the words settle. "But the truth is, maybe it's not about waiting anymore. Maybe it's about standing." He took a slow breath, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "I've spent the last few years listening. To kids who aged out of the system and never got a second chance. To nurses who reuse gloves because the budget doesn't stretch far enough. To mothers who skip meals so their children can eat. To veterans who wonder if they came home just to be forgotten." He looked across the crowd, his gaze unwavering. "And all of you, you've done more than speak. You've reminded me of something I forgot." He tapped the side of the podium. "That leadership isn't a title, it's an act." A gust of wind passed through the park, rustling the signs, brushing cheeks, lifting hair. But no one moved. Keanu looked down for a moment, then he said it. "I'm not here to save anyone. I'm not here to pretend I have every answer. But I see you, I hear you, and I'm willing to walk with you." His next words were slow, quiet, clear. "So, if you're asking, then yes." A ripple passed through the audience. A run. No music played, no confetti fell, but the reaction didn't need decoration. It built like a storm breaking open, not wild, but powerful. Hands clapped, voices shouted, people embraced. The little girl who had read the poem stood on her chair, eyes wide, beaming. The pastor pressed his hand to his heart. The teenager from earlier raised his fist, not in protest, but in belief. Keanu stepped back from the mic, nodded once, and walked down the steps. He didn't linger on stage. He blended back into the crowd, because this wasn't his moment alone. It belonged to everyone who had ever whispered, "If only someone would lead us." And now someone had answered. The moment didn't end when Keanu stepped down from the stage. If anything, it deepened. People stood frozen in their places, some wiping tears, others gripping the hands of those beside them. The power of what they'd just heard hadn't fully landed. It was still circling overhead like thunder that hadn't yet reached the ground. Sophia and Malik waited at the edge of the park. They didn't speak until Keanu reached them. "You said it," Sophia whispered. "You really said it." Keanu nodded once. "I meant it." Malik looked at the crowd still buzzing in disbelief. "Now they'll want more. Something official." "I know." 2 days later, he gave them what they were waiting for. It wasn't in a ballroom or a campaign event hall. It was on the steps of the old civic library, one of the few public buildings in the city that hadn't been turned into a private office or a vacant lot. It mattered that he chose it. It mattered that the podium wasn't polished, that the people stood shoulder to shoulder on the ground, not separated by velvet ropes. No music played. No banners waved. Just people waiting. The news crew showed up anyway, cameras balanced on shoulders, reporters whispering over live feeds. But this time, Keanu wasn't speaking to networks. He was speaking to the people who had filled his mailbox with pain, the ones who showed up at town halls and rallies, the ones who never asked him to fix everything, only to care enough not to walk away. He stood at the podium in a simple dark jacket and opened his notes. Then he set them aside. He looked into the crowd, then past them. His voice was calm, grounded. "I don't come here today with a campaign slogan. I don't have a party banner or a polished team of consultants behind me." He paused. "What I have is something quieter, but maybe more powerful." He raised his eyes. "I have your stories, and I have what they gave me." Another pause. "They gave me the truth." He let that breathe before continuing. "And once you've seen the truth, you can't go back to pretending it's not there. Not if you're honest, not if you have a heart." Keanu looked out over the crowd again. Faces of all ages, colors, and stories. Some people wore work uniforms, others wore hoodies. A few held signs that simply said, "We believe you." "I've spent the last few years doing what many people in this country are forced to do," he continued. "Listening, waiting, hoping someone with more power, more reach, more authority would do the right thing." He paused, glancing at the press area, then back to the crowd. "I thought maybe my job was just to shine a light, stay out of the way, amplify the right voices. But the letters kept coming, the stories kept getting louder. Not because people were yelling, but because they've been ignored for so long. Even whispers now sound like thunder." A man near the front, a janitor still in uniform, nodded with tears in his eyes. Keanu's voice softened. "I've met kids who aged out of foster care with nothing but a trash bag, veterans who can't afford rent, teachers buying supplies from their own paychecks, single parents choosing between dinner and medicine. None of this should be normal." He let the silence fill the air again. "Some have told me I'm not qualified to run, that I'm not trained for politics." He offered a faint smile. "And maybe that's true." Then he leaned in, his tone changing, not louder, but firmer. "But maybe the best kind of qualification isn't how well you play the game. Maybe it's how long you've stood outside of it, watching people suffer while nothing changes." The crowd stirred. "I've met leaders who knew every policy number, but forgot how to look someone in the eye. I've read reports with more data than dignity. I've seen systems designed to manage people instead of serve them." He looked down for a moment, collected himself. "So no, I don't come here today with a platform written by consultants. I come with something older, something heavier." He tapped his chest. "I come with heart. with grief, with anger, with hope, and with a promise. He stepped back slightly from the podium, eyes shining but steady. A promise to never stop listening, to never pretend I have all the answers, but to show up, again and again, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. He raised his chin slightly. Because maybe leadership isn't about having power, maybe it's about having the courage to care, loudly. Keanu's final words came quietly, but they carried farther than any headline. I never wanted power, he said. I never wanted a title, a convoy, or a polished campaign. What I wanted, what I still want, is for every person who's been made to feel invisible to know, I see you. He let the weight of it settle. I see you when your fridge is empty but your rent is paid. I see you when you work double shifts and still can't afford daycare. I see you when you show up to vote even though the line is 3 hours long. I see you when you stay after school with the kids no one else believes in. I see you when you give your last blanket to someone colder than you. His voice dropped even further. I see you, and I'm with you. A murmur passed through the crowd. Hands clutched coats, arms folded over hearts. Some wept openly. So yes, he said finally, I'm running. The words echoed through the square. He didn't raise his arms. He didn't gesture for cheers. But the people responded anyway. Not instantly, not like a cue, but like a wave building from somewhere deep. One voice clapped, then another. A cheer rose on the right. A child shouted, "Yes!" from someone's shoulders. And then, like a dam-breaking applause. Not for celebrity, not for spectacle, but for a man who had said what they'd been aching to hear. That leadership could still mean listening. That compassion still had a place at the table. That maybe, just maybe, the country hadn't given up on itself after all. Keanu stepped down from the podium. The cameras surged forward. Reporters shouted questions. Volunteers reached out for handshakes. But he didn't pause for any of it. He walked straight into the crowd. Not above it, not apart from it, into it. The people parted, then surrounded him, not to worship but to welcome, to tell him they believed, not in perfection, but in presence. And as the sun began to dip behind the rooftops, one thought rang louder than any headline. This wasn't just a speech. It was a beginning. It took less than an hour for the world to find out. By the time Keanu left the steps of the civic library and returned to his apartment, the footage of his speech had already been clipped, subtitled, translated, and uploaded across every major platform. There had been no press team, no formal broadcast, no campaign rollout. But the people didn't wait for a press release. They made it their own. A local journalist posted the first clean clip. Just 3 minutes long, no commentary, no music. Just Keanu's voice and the raw backdrop of the old library behind him. It got 30,000 shares in its first hour. A mother in Cleveland reshared it with a simple caption, "He sees us." From there, it grew. The first wave came from those who had been watching him for months. Teachers, nurses, caseworkers, foster youth. They reposted the moment with messages like, "I never thought someone like him would run for us," and "This isn't politics, this is humanity." Then celebrities began to take notice. A Grammy-winning singer tweeted, "This isn't a performance, this is a calling." A retired NFL player posted a short video, "I've never voted, but I'll vote for him." Then came the networks. Cable news ran the speech on repeat, cutting it into segments, zooming in on his face, framing it with questions. One outlet labeled it a spiritual moment in a political drought. Another called it reckless emotionalism dressed as sincerity. By midday, Keanu's face was on every screen. Pundits argued, "He's an actor, this is performance art." No, this is what leadership without ego actually looks like. He's unqualified. He's uncorrupted. Has no plan. He has more clarity than half of Washington. The internet lit up. Within 12 hours, Run Keanu Run trended in over 30 countries, not just in the US, but in Canada, Germany, Japan, Brazil, and South Africa. Malik showed Keanu the heat map the next morning. "You're going viral in places we didn't even translate the speech to yet." Keanu stared at the screen. "This wasn't supposed to go global," he said softly. Sophia, watching from behind, said, "It didn't go global because it was political. It went global because it was human." A mother in Missouri posted a video while washing dishes. "I've never believed in politics, but I believe in this man." And just like that, the ripple became a wave. Within 2 days, the ripple had become a national tremor. At airports, travelers watched the footage on terminal TVs. In cafes, the speech played from open laptops. In classrooms, students asked their teachers if they could talk about Keanu's words instead of their scheduled lesson. Some said it felt like something they were supposed to remember. The momentum was unlike anything Malik had seen. "This isn't a campaign," he said, sitting in the corner of their temporary Detroit office. "It's a movement, and it's not coming from us. It's coming from them." Keanu sat quietly on the couch, holding a printout of comments from the foster file site. He'd started reading them in batches now, because taking in too many at once felt like standing in a flood. One read, "I never knew how much I needed to hear a leader say, 'I see you,' until he did." Another, "For the first time, I feel like someone's running toward us instead of away." The tone was never desperate. It was hopeful. And that scared some people. Political operatives began circling. Some offered support, others issued warnings. An anonymous strategist messaged Sophia and said, "Tell him to stay in his lane. This will get ugly fast." That same morning, a major newspaper published a front-page headline, "He's for real. Hollywood's star of humility steps into the political ring." Inside, the op-ed was less generous. It read, "Keanu Reeves has made a career of saying little and looking good doing it. Now he's attempting to turn empathy into executive power. But will feelings be enough when faced with real governance?" Malik rolled his eyes. "They still think this is about image." But Sophia shook her head. "No, they're starting to realize it's about something bigger, and that's what's got them scared." The same day, Keanu received a private message from a retired congressman. "I don't agree with your approach, but I've been in this business for 40 years, and I've never seen people respond to a speech like that. Whatever you do next, don't forget who brought you here." He didn't plan to. Back at the foster files office, the comments section overflowed. Teachers from Georgia, farmers from Nebraska, a nurse from Alaska wrote, "He said the thing no one says anymore. I'm with you. That was all I needed." A youth pastor in Michigan left a one-line message. "We've had leaders who looked strong. Maybe now it's time for one who sounds human." Keanu sat with that one for a long time, because deep down he knew it wasn't just a speech that changed everything. It was how it made people feel seen again. As the national conversation swirled, the quiet moments mattered most to Keanu. Late at night, he walked the streets of the city, alone, hands tucked into his coat pockets. A few people recognized him, nodded, and let him pass without a word. Others simply moved on, unaware that the man behind the movement was still listening. He stopped by the public library where he had first spoken months ago. On the steps, someone had chalked the words, "Don't run for us, run with us." Inside the library, a security guard smiled and handed him a folded paper. "A woman came by this morning and asked me to give you this if you ever returned," he said. Keanu opened the note. It read, "You don't know me, but when you said, 'I'm with you,' I finally believed someone meant it. Keep going. We'll catch up." No name, just that message. He folded it carefully and slid it into his coat. The media would continue to analyze every word he'd said. Columnists would debate whether compassion could lead a country. But Keanu wasn't chasing headlines. He was chasing healing. And in that pursuit, it became clear. This wasn't a performance. It wasn't a publicity wave. It was a reckoning, and it had only just begun. The idea for the livestream came from Sophia. "We don't need another press event," she said. "We need a conversation." Keanu agreed immediately, but not with advisors or journalists. He wanted to hear from the ones who rarely got the mic. Young people, teenagers, college students, first-job workers, the in-between generation growing up on the edge of promises never kept. So they set it up. No production crew, just a laptop, a quiet room, and a simple post. "Keanu is going live to hear from the next generation. No speeches, just you. Join us." It was scheduled for a Thursday evening, 7 p.m. Eastern. No expectations, no scripts, just an open invitation. Within 10 minutes of the live stream going live, over 80,000 people had joined. It wasn't flashy. Keanu sat in front of a plain gray wall. He wore a soft sweater, sleeves rolled to his elbows. No teleprompter, no lights. Just the comment feed, flooding faster than anyone could track. He smiled. "Hey," he said softly. "Thank you for being here." He answered a few general questions at first. Why he stepped forward, what mattered most to him, why he didn't align with any party. Then the screen split. First guest. A teenage girl appeared. The caption below read, "Haley, 16, Mobile, Alabama." She looked nervous, biting her lip before speaking. "Hi," she said. "I hope it's okay, I'm not old enough to vote yet." Keanu smiled warmly. "Of course it's okay." Haley took a breath. "I've watched everything," she said. "The rallies, the speech, even the stuff from before with the shelters. And I guess I just want to ask, will you still fight for people like me, even if we can't help you win?" Keanu's face didn't change. His voice didn't rise. "Yes," he said. "Especially you." Haley blinked, holding back tears. "Because leadership isn't about votes," he continued. "It's about the people who carry the consequences, and that includes you, especially you." Haley mouthed "thank you" as the screen faded. The chat exploded. One comment read, "That answer alone deserves the presidency." Another, "He just spoke to every teenager who's ever felt powerless." And the live stream kept going. The next caller was a boy from Portland, 17, wearing a hoodie and earbuds. "My name's Jamal," he said. "I'm a senior. I don't really believe in this stuff. Politics. None of it's ever helped my neighborhood." Keanu nodded. "I hear that." Jamal looked down, then back at the screen. "But I watched your speech. I don't know, it felt like something different, like maybe you'd actually show up." Keanu leaned forward. "I can't undo what's been broken," he said. "But I can promise I won't disappear. I'll show up, again and again, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's hard." Jamal didn't smile, but his shoulders dropped, just a little. "Okay," he said quietly. "That matters." Another guest joined, Sarah, 19, in her dorm room in Wisconsin. Behind her, a bulletin board was pinned with notes and sticky reminders. She said she was studying to become a social worker. "I've seen my classmates lose interest in everything," she said. "We talk about change, but it always feels like a fantasy." Keanu said, "You ever notice how people call you idealistic when you care too much?" She laughed. "Yeah, like that's a bad thing." "I think idealism is just courage that hasn't been crushed yet," he said. "And the world doesn't need less of that, it needs more." The chat filled with hearts and crying emojis. Viewers began sharing their stories in real time. A 16-year-old from Texas said they were the only person in their family not working 2 jobs. A college freshman in New York talked about sleeping in their car to afford books. But what stood out most wasn't the pain, it was the honesty. They weren't begging, they weren't demanding, they just wanted someone to hear them. One guest, Mateo, 20, from New Mexico, said, "If we don't see ourselves in the future, we stop investing in it." Keanu responded softly, "Then let's rebuild a future you belong to." As the live stream went on, Sophia watched from across the room. She wasn't moderating, just observing. And even she couldn't believe what was happening. People weren't just listening. They were connecting, across states, across backgrounds, across generations. And when Keanu paused halfway through to take a breath, someone posted a message in the comments that took off instantly. "What's one thing a leader has done that truly made you feel seen? Drop it here, we're reading." And they did. Thousands did. The comments came in waves. Some were just a sentence, others whole paragraphs. A few shared photos, a few used only emojis. But every one of them had weight, a rhythm, a pulse. "When my teacher stayed after school for an hour because I didn't understand math." "When a bus driver noticed I missed 2 days and asked if I was okay." "When a volunteer at the shelter remembered my name." Keanu read as many as he could, eyes scanning the scrolling screen. He knew he couldn't reply to them all, but he didn't have to. Just reading them aloud made people feel heard. So he began to do just that. One by one, slowly. Here's one from Leo, 18, Georgia. He writes, "When my principal hugged me after my dad's sentencing, I didn't feel invisible anymore." Sophie, 15, Minnesota. "A librarian let me sit in the building after closing when it was freezing. She just nodded and said, 'Stay warm, sweetheart.' I never forgot that." The silence on the other end wasn't empty. It was reverent. It was working, not as a campaign tactic, not as a show, but as a window into the heart of a generation desperate to be taken seriously. As the live stream neared the 2-hour mark, Keanu glanced at the time, then leaned closer to the camera. "I don't know what's going to happen in the months ahead," he said, "but I know one thing. If we build this together, if we keep listening like this, we won't just be shouting into the void, we'll be building something real." He looked down, then back up again. "And you don't have to wait to be older or richer or more powerful to be part of it. You're already in it. Right now." The final message he read came from an anonymous user. It said, "Thank you for not looking away." He closed the laptop slowly, and for a moment he just sat there, still, listening. The backlash came fast, and it came organized. Within 72 hours of Keanu's first national live stream, a wave of opposition began crashing through news cycles and social media feeds. It started with whispers, then headlines, then full-blown segments. One news outlet aired a montage of Keanu's movie scenes, intercut with dramatic music, painting him as someone too emotional, too idealistic, too Hollywood to lead a country. Another aired an old interview from 15 years ago, where Keanu had paused and said he didn't believe in political labels. The anchor followed it with, "So, is this who you want defining your future?" Talk radio picked it up next. "He's charming, sure," one host sneered, "but don't forget, he's a millionaire actor pretending to be a messiah. Wake up." Then came the social media smear campaigns. Out-of-contextual photos, fabricated quotes, deepfakes designed to make him look confused or careless. Comment sections flooded with identical phrases, posted from anonymous accounts. "Looks like the mask is slipping. Too emotional to lead. Another spoiled celebrity trying to play hero." The strategy was obvious. Cast doubt on his character before his ideas could fully take root. Malik sat at the edge of the office couch, watching headlines update in real time. "They're going full throttle," he said. "They're scared." Sophia clicked through the trending hashtags. Some were genuine criticism, but many followed a familiar script, engineered, coordinated. "They're not just trying to stop him," she muttered. "They're trying to erase what he represents." Keanu didn't say much. He stood behind them, hands in his pockets, watching quietly. "They're twisting everything," Sophia said again, "even the foster care work. They're using the term publicity stunt like it's a hashtag." "What do we do?" Malik asked. "Do we respond?" Keanu thought for a long moment. Then he said, "No. We don't answer noise with more noise." "So what do you suggest?" "I'm going to the children's hospital." They both looked at him. He didn't blink. "I'm not here to defend my image. I'm here to serve people." That afternoon, he arrived at a pediatric cancer ward in downtown Detroit without any press or handlers, No cameras, no announcement. He came with one bag. Inside were 6 storybooks, 2 stuffed animals, and a sketch pad. He stayed for 3 hours. The hospital staff didn't know what to expect. When Keanu Reeves walked through the doors of the pediatric oncology wing, there was a brief moment of stunned recognition, but no chaos. He greeted the nurses at the check-in station, bowed slightly, and asked, "Do you have time for a guest today?" They said yes. Room by room, Keanu moved gently and unhurried. He sat with a 6-year-old girl named Ava, who was battling leukemia. She wanted to hear a story about a dragon who lost her fire but found it again by listening to the wind. Keanu read every word like it mattered. Next was Jordan, age 9, who had drawn his Ivy line into a comic book panel on his notepad. Keanu sat beside him and asked, "What's the hero's power?" Jordan grinned and said, "He heals people when he listens really hard." Keanu replied, "Sounds familiar." A nurse passed by the room and froze when she saw it. No fanfare, no photos, just a man leaning over a hospital bed, reading a worn copy of Charlotte's Web to a child who kept asking questions between chemo naps. The staff didn't want to interrupt, but word traveled fast. Doctors paused in the hallway. Volunteers peeked in quietly, then turned away smiling. It wasn't spectacle. It was stillness. One nurse, Grace, finally posted a single photo hours later. Just Keanu, cross-legged on the floor, reading to 3 kids like they were the most important people in the world. Her caption was simple. They tried to shame him, he responded with kindness. By the time Keanu left the hospital, the online attacks hadn't slowed, but something had changed in the way people talked about them. Suddenly, the smear clips felt hollow. The edited sound bites looked small, because the man they tried to paint as a fraud had just spent the day doing what most of them wouldn't, showing up, not for applause, but for presence. When Malik saw the photo later that night, he didn't speak for a full minute. He just held his phone and said, "They're not ready for this kind of answer." Sophia was already typing a reply to someone accusing Keanu of hiding. She stopped midway, deleted it, then posted the nurse's photo instead, with one word, character. By the weekend, the attacks had taken a different tone. Commentators began to hedge their language. One said, "I still don't think he's presidential material, but maybe we underestimated his sincerity." Another admitted, "If nothing else, the man walks his talk." Keanu didn't address any of it publicly. Instead, he returned to his office and wrote thank you notes to every nurse he'd met at the hospital. Handwritten, no digital copies, just ink, gratitude, and care. In the next campaign briefing, Sophia mentioned they were getting hundreds of emails daily from parents asking if Keanu would visit their children's schools or hospitals. Many didn't want policies. They just wanted to know he still believed in what he said. Keanu looked up and said, "I do." That night, Malik received a message from a conservative veteran who had posted critical tweets just a week earlier. He said, "I don't agree with your guy, but I saw what he did at that hospital. I served overseas, and I've seen men fake courage. He's not faking." The next day, a youth shelter director posted something that went viral without trying. They'd put a target on his back. He answered by putting himself in front of a child who needed to hear a story. The line echoed everywhere. Keanu didn't flinch. He didn't fight back. He walked through the storm with something his critics couldn't manufacture: consistency, and it was beginning to change everything. The day after the hospital visit, Keanu sat at his kitchen table long past midnight, sipping cold tea and staring at a blank notepad. Not with the weight of doubt, but with the clarity that something new had to begin. He couldn't do this alone anymore, not because he was tired, but because the road ahead demanded more than one voice. It needed a chorus. So he started making a list, not of politicians or consultants, but of people who had shown him something more powerful than credentials. People who knew what it meant to fight quietly for others. At the top of the list was Sophia. She had stood beside him from the beginning. A strategist, yes, but more than that, a compass. She saw not only where the movement was heading, but how it could stay true to itself while it grew. She didn't speak in slogans. She asked hard questions and refused to let Keanu shrink from them. Then Malik, a natural organizer with a heart wired for justice and a mind that never stopped mapping solutions. He understood the infrastructure behind passion. He could turn emotion into logistics, belief into action. Malik had grown up seeing systems fail, and rather than walking away, he built new ones in their place. Next was Anita Flores, a 62-year-old social worker who had retired from the state foster system but never really left. She had been the one to send Keanu the box of vanishing case files back in his early foster files days. She had seen more heartbreak than most people could fathom, but still believed in redemption, even for the system itself. Then came Travis, a soft-spoken housing advocate from Baltimore who had lived in his car for 3 years after college and turned that experience into a statewide initiative that placed over 2,000 formerly homeless families into stable housing. He didn't carry a resume, he carried a list of names, people he still checked in on long after the headlines faded. And finally, Mariah. She wasn't a symbol, she was a voice. Now, 19, she had taken her scholarship and begun speaking at schools and youth centers, not as an inspiration, but as a mirror. Kids listened to her because she didn't pretend it had gotten easy. She told the truth, and in a world addicted to appearances, that made her priceless. They didn't meet in a conference room or a sleek co-working space. Keanu asked them to gather in the basement of a small neighborhood church in Detroit, the kind with folding chairs, uneven floors, and water-stained walls. It wasn't about symbolism, it was about grounding. He wanted the first conversation to happen somewhere that didn't echo with money or politics, but with stories. The team arrived one by one. Sophia brought 2 notebooks and a stack of folders. Malik had a beat-up laptop and a backpack full of field reports. Anita walked in with a thermos of coffee and a folder bulging with handwritten notes from her old case files. Travis wore a hoodie and carried nothing but a tablet loaded with housing data and first-hand testimonies. Mariah arrived last, wearing jeans and a t-shirt that read, "I am not my file number." They greeted each other with quiet warmth. There was no ice to break. They'd all been in the trenches, some together, some separately, but always on the same side. Keanu didn't sit at the head of the circle. He pulled a chair into the same row as everyone else and waited until the last cup of coffee had been poured before he spoke. "Thank you for being here," he said. "I know how busy your lives already are. I know how much you carry. So, I want to say this clearly. This isn't a campaign team. This is a truth team." They listened. "I don't want consultants who will tell me how to win debates. I want people who will make sure I don't lose sight of why I started. That's what this space is for, not just to strategize, but to remember." Sophia leaned forward. "What do you want us to build?" Keanu smiled faintly. "Not a campaign," he said, "a chorus." They all looked at him. A chorus means no one voice carries the whole thing. It means harmony. It means listening as much as leading. Anita nodded slowly. "That's the first thing I've heard in weeks that didn't sound like spin." Travis added, "Most people build platforms. You're building a conversation." Mariah said nothing at first. Then she looked around the room and said, "If this is going to work, we can't just tell people what we'll do for them. We have to tell them they belong in it." Everyone nodded, because they already knew. This wasn't about policies yet. It was about people. They spent the next few hours not drawing up strategies, but sharing truths. Anita told a story about a boy she once placed in a home that looked perfect on paper, but it was cold inside. He didn't need a checklist, she said. He needed a bed that didn't feel borrowed. Travis shared the names of 5 families he still visited every month. One of the girls just graduated, first in her family. Her mom still works 2 jobs, but they're stable now. And she said something to me last week. We finally got to stop surviving. Mariah recounted a talk she gave to a group of high schoolers last month. One of the girls asked me if pain ever becomes your friend. I told her no, but sometimes it becomes your teacher. Sophia listened, took notes, then finally said, "We can shape something from this, not a message, an invitation." Malik was already scribbling diagrams, mumbling to himself about digital infrastructure and grassroots chapters. "We need to build access points," he said, "so anyone, anywhere, can join in without permission." Keanu sat back, absorbing all of it. He didn't need to steer. They were already moving in the right direction. Before the meeting ended, he looked around the circle one last time. "I've been asked what kind of leader I want to be," he said. "I think this is it. This moment, right here. Not being at the center, just being part of something honest." No one applauded. They didn't need to. They all stood up slowly, each one energized in a quiet, grounded way. There were no handshakes, just hugs and nods. They didn't have a campaign slogan, a color scheme, or even a logo. What they had was a shared purpose. And as they climbed the stairs out of the basement and into the gray light of evening, it was clear this wasn't the launch of a political campaign. It was the beginning of a chorus, and the country was about to hear it. It came in the form of an email. No name, just an encrypted address. The subject line read, "Let's talk potential." Sophia found it early that morning, buried beneath dozens of scheduling notes and press requests. She almost deleted it, but something about the tone made her stop. She opened it and read it twice before calling Keanu. "There's an offer," she said. He was in the middle of writing thank you cards to volunteers in Pittsburgh. He looked up. "From who?" "They didn't say, but it's significant." "How much?" $7 million to start." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "And the catch?" "They want to help focus the message," their words, said they can help pivot the narrative to be more patriotic, more economic, less emotional. Keanu didn't answer right away. He stood and walked to the window, staring out at the city, coming alive with morning light, car horns, street sweepers, a mother pulling a stroller across a crosswalk. Sophia waited. Finally, he said, "Tell them no." She nodded. "You sure? If the message changes, it's not ours anymore." She replied to the email with one sentence, "We respectfully decline. This movement doesn't have a price." They didn't hear back. But something changed that week. It began small. A visit to a women's shelter in Milwaukee was suddenly canceled due to new security protocols. Then a youth center in St. Louis cited permit issues and closed its doors the morning of Keanu's scheduled arrival. Sophia noticed the pattern. 2 visits canceled in 2 days, she said. "That's not coincidence." Then came the worst of it. The Foster Files Foundation accounts were temporarily frozen by their primary bank. Malik discovered it while trying to send funds to a community kitchen in Cleveland. "Is saying the account's under review," he said, scrolling through his phone. "All disbursements locked, no notice, no reason." Within hours, they were on the phone with attorneys and financial officers, trying to figure out if it was a technical glitch or something more deliberate. By sunset, it was clear. The movement had attracted attention, and not all of it wanted change. Sophia slammed her laptop shut. "This isn't a warning, it's sabotage." Keanu didn't raise his voice. He poured himself a glass of water and said calmly, "If they're scared of us before we've even begun, that means we're onto something." The next morning, Sophia was already on the phone by 6:00 a.m., her voice sharp but controlled as she navigated through endless layers of automated banking menus and vague departmental transfers. She hung up and turned to Malik. "They're saying it's a compliance review, routine, but they won't say who flagged it or why." Malik shook his head. "That account's been running clean for 2 years. No flagged donations, no missed filings." Keanu listened from across the room, quietly leafing through a file of volunteer stories they'd planned to feature in the next digital campaign. He looked up. "Can we still move?" Malik nodded. "Barely. We've got enough in the backup account to get through a few days, but we need answers soon." That afternoon, Anita arrived, having driven in from Cleveland without warning. She stepped into the room like she had been summoned by instinct. "Damien froze your accounts?" she asked. Sophia nodded. Anita set her bag down and crossed her arms. "Then we stop using the front door." Keanu looked at her. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we go old school, word of mouth, local coordination. You've already got people on the ground. They don't need a bank transfer to host a listening circle or serve food. They need to know you're still in." Keanu leaned back in his chair. "We're still in." Mariah joined later that day, fresh off a school visit where students had asked her how they could help Mr. Reeves win without getting swallowed. She entered the room quietly, but her presence shifted the energy. "They're trying to cut us off from each other," she said, "so we connect even harder." Travis, who had been silent most of the day, finally spoke. "Some of us don't need systems to keep going. We were born in the cracks, raised in the workaround. You cut our power, we meet in living rooms. You block our funds, we share meals. You try to silence us, we sing louder." Sophia sat back, her frustration softening into resolve. "So we double down." Malik nodded. "We lean into the network we already have." That night, the team created a new plan, not to scale up, but to deepen. Not to react, but to reaffirm. They would move like water, quiet, persistent, and impossible to stop. The following day, something unexpected happened. Dozens of community leaders who had once partnered with the Foster Files began reaching out, unsolicited. Directors of local shelters, school administrators, food pantry organizers, all with the same message. "We heard what happened. We're still with you." Some offered meeting space. Others wired small donations from personal accounts. A librarian in Kansas sent a message: "If they block your platform, we'll build our own." That night, Keanu attended a small round table hosted in the back of a bookstore. Only 15 people were there, sitting on mismatched chairs between shelves of biographies and cookbooks. No cameras, no agenda. Just one question. "What now?" Keanu looked around the circle. "I'm not afraid of opposition," he said. "I'm afraid of losing why we started." A man in the back raised his hand. "But what if this gets bigger than all of us?" Keanu nodded. "Then we hold each other accountable. We don't let money speak louder than the mission. We stay rooted." A woman replied, "That sounds like faith." Keanu smiled. "Maybe it is." Later that evening, back at headquarters, Sophia handed him a small envelope that had arrived in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single piece of paper, handwritten, careful block letters. It read, "Don't sell your voice. That's what they're really after." Keanu folded the note and placed it in the same pocket where he kept Mariah's drawing and Angela's letter. Not because it warned him, but because it reminded him. He turned to Sophia and Malik. "We're going to keep building, not just louder, but truer." The attacks hadn't stopped. The accounts were still frozen. The air felt tighter now, the shadows a little longer. But the people were closer than ever. And that was the part no one could sabotage. It started with a sign taped to a coffee shop window in Portland. A college sophomore named Dylan had printed out one of Keanu's quotes. "Compassion isn't weakness. It's what leadership should look like," and pinned it beside a bulletin about lost keys. He didn't expect anyone to notice. But they did. The next morning, 5 more quotes appeared, then handwritten posters, then chalk messages on sidewalks. One student brought a portable speaker to campus and played audio from Keanu's town hall with youth. It drew a crowd. By evening, a group of students had taken over a section of the university plaza. They held signs, spoke into a megaphone, started something they didn't call a rally, just a gathering, a reclaiming of space. Someone held a hand-painted board that read, "We are the policy." News traveled fast. In Chicago, it was a civics teacher named Miss Raines who picked up the energy. She asked her high school class, "What does leadership feel like?" Not sound like, but feel like. Students answered, "Safe." seen, honest, human. She then showed them Keanu's recent live stream. One student whispered, "Why doesn't anyone talk to us like that?" The next day, those same students brought cardboard signs to school. During lunch, they cleaned trash from the neighborhood park. After school, they stood outside the building and held signs. Leadership starts with listening. We believe in someone who believes in us. They didn't chant, they didn't demand, they just stood, calm, determined, present. And then came Tulsa. At a union hall near the river, a retired welder named Jerome watched a clip of Keanu reading to children in a cancer ward. Something in him cracked open. He called a few friends, old co-workers, and his pastor. They met in the union building 2 nights later and hung a banner that read, "Respect begins with being seen." More than 40 people showed up. Many had never voted in the same election. They didn't agree on everything, but they all agreed on this. Keanu wasn't promising perfection. He was promising to show up. The movement was no longer waiting for permission. It was moving on its own. Back at headquarters, Sophia pulled together footage from each gathering. Young people in raincoats, parents holding toddlers, grandmothers passing out candles. She showed Keanu the clips in the quiet of the planning room. "They're not asking for your leadership," she said. "They're modeling it." Keanu stared at the screen for a long time before saying softly, "Let's join them." Keanu didn't want to overshadow what had begun. That was his only concern, but Sophia insisted, and Malik agreed. "This isn't about taking control," Malik said. "It's about showing up to the movement you helped spark." So they reached out to the youth organizers in Tulsa, 3 students and 1 single mom who worked nights and helped coordinate on her lunch break. They'd set up a rally behind a community center, using their own folding chairs, donated snacks, and a borrowed sound system from a nearby church. Keanu didn't fly in. He didn't send a camera crew. He just asked if they had a screen and a decent Wi-Fi connection. They did. So, on a cloudy Saturday afternoon, a homemade projection flickered to life on the back of a wall. The crowd quieted as Keanu's face appeared, sitting in his office, wearing a black t-shirt and a look of disbelief. "I'm not here to lead this rally," he began. "I'm here because you're already leading." He paused, then continued. "I watched the footage of you all standing in the rain, holding signs made from pizza boxes and printer paper, and I realized you don't need permission to belong to something real. You already belong." Applause broke out through the static of a second-hand speaker system. A teenage girl stepped up to the mic after and said, "You make us feel like we matter, even when the world says we're too young." Keanu replied, "Age doesn't measure worth. Heart does." Later that day, videos from the event flooded social media. The footage wasn't high resolution, the audio wavered, but the message was undeniable. In one clip, a little boy sat on his dad's shoulders holding a sign in crayon, "I believe in kindness." In another, an elderly pastor with trembling hands stood beside a union rep and said, "This is the first time I've stood next to someone half my age and believed we were fighting the same fight." Former skeptics started speaking out. A doctor in Boston wrote, "I've treated patients for decades, never thought politics would give me hope until now." A teachers' union in Michigan issued a rare endorsement. "We've been ignored long enough. This man listens." A civil rights activist from Selma posted, "He may not have marched in our past, but he's walking in our spirit." The movement had outgrown one man, but somehow that made it stronger. As the week unfolded, the movement spread, not like wildfire, but like roots beneath the surface. In Detroit, a barber offered free cuts on Saturdays to anyone who brought in a handwritten letter about what dignity meant to them. In New Orleans, a group of nurses hosted a roundtable under a freeway overpass to discuss how to fix healthcare from the bottom up. In Oakland, a Sunday school replaced its regular sermon with a discussion on compassion in leadership. None of it was coordinated. All of it mattered. Keanu watched from a distance, not trying to control it, just witnessing. The people had stopped waiting for politics to rescue them. They were building something of their own, shaped not by a party, but by purpose. He attended another rally virtually, this time in Chicago, where a grandmother named Lottie stood in front of a crowd of factory workers and teenagers. Her voice cracked as she said, "I didn't think I'd live to see the day someone told us we weren't too broken to be worth leading." Later that night, Keanu sat with the team in their office. The lights were dim, papers everywhere, coffee going cold. Sophia turned to him. "This isn't a campaign anymore," she said. "It's a movement of memory, people remembering who they are, what they deserve." Keanu nodded slowly. "And what they're becoming," Malik added. "They've stopped looking up. They're looking at each other." Mariah, curled up in the corner with her laptop, said quietly, "We just gave them permission." Keanu looked around the room and smiled. "We didn't give them anything," he said. "We just stopped getting in the way." Outside, the streetlights flickered on across the city. Inside, something brighter was still burning. Not because of power, but because of people. Her name was Layla, 7 years old, big eyes, thin wrists. She had given Keanu a bracelet made of yarn and beads during a shelter visit in Phoenix 2 months earlier. He remembered because she insisted on tying it to his wrist herself, her tiny fingers struggling with the knot. "You have to keep it," she'd said. "It's for protection." He'd promised to wear it as long as he could. And he had. Until yesterday. The message came quietly, through a local organizer. No headlines, no tweets, just a voicemail that began with a pause and ended with the words, "Layla passed away last night." Keanu didn't say anything for a while. He sat in the back corner of the campaign office, watching the message play again. Then again. The words didn't change, but the weight of them seemed to double each time. She had been denied treatment. Her mother had applied for a subsidy that got stuck in processing. The hospital said they needed confirmation. The confirmation never came. So they waited. By the time they got the approval, it was too late. Sophia heard the message next. Then Malik. No one said much. It was too quiet for anger, too heavy for outrage. Later that night, when the building had cleared out, Keanu stayed behind. He sat in his chair, staring at the bracelet that now sat on the desk in front of him. The beads spelled out her name in shaky plastic letters. Some of the color had faded. The silence of the room pressed in around him, and for the first time in weeks, the weight broke through. He wept. Not with noise, not with collapse. Just stillness and tears. It wasn't just about Layla. It was about every Layla. The ones waiting in limbo. The ones passed between systems. The ones turned into paperwork. The ones who believed for one moment that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. And he had told her it would be. He had looked into her eyes and promised her that help was coming, and now she was gone. Malik found him there just after 10:30 p.m. He didn't knock, just stepped into the room slowly, his voice soft. "We've been looking for you." Keanu didn't turn. Malik walked in and sat across from him, his eyes falling on the bracelet lying on the desk. "Layla," he said quietly. Keanu nodded once. The silence between them stretched long, but not empty. Malik didn't fill it with platitudes. He just waited until Keanu finally spoke. "What if this pain is bigger than what I can fix?" His voice cracked on the last word. It wasn't a question of strategy, it was a question of purpose, of worth, of the weight that every promise carries when it lands in a... Malik leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "It is." Keanu looked up. Malik's eyes were steady, kind, but unflinching. "It is bigger," he said again. "You're not supposed to fix all of it. You never were." Keanu didn't respond, so Malik kept going. "But that's why you're the one we follow, not because you have all the answers, but because you don't run from pain, you walk toward it." He paused, letting that truth land. "That's what Layla saw in you. That's what I see in you." Keanu wiped his face with the sleeve of his sweater. "I told her we were building something better." "You are," Malik said, "but you also told her the truth. You didn't promise it would happen in time. You promised it would happen. And it is." Keanu looked down at the bracelet again. "She was 7. "I know." There was another long silence. Then Malik added, "But she didn't die not knowing she mattered." That stopped Keanu cold. "She gave you something, a bracelet, but more than that. She gave you her belief, and you carried it." Keanu nodded slowly, his voice barely audible. "She deserved more." "They all do," Malik said. "That's why we don't stop. That's why we grieve. And then we keep walking." He stood and walked to the door, then turned back. "Cry if you need to, break down, but don't back down." Keanu didn't speak. But as Malik walked out, he took the bracelet gently in his hand, turned it over once, and pressed it against his chest. Not as a symbol, but as a vow. The next morning, Keanu returned to the office early. The sun hadn't fully risen, and the city outside was quiet, still in its soft blue hour. He moved through the empty hallways without turning on the lights, making his way to the small desk in the back where stacks of letters waited, handwritten notes from people across the country. He opened one. It was from a young nurse in West Virginia. She'd written about rationing supplies, about losing patients not from lack of skill, but from a broken system that asked her to choose who got attention and who didn't. At the bottom of the letter, she wrote, "Sometimes I feel like I'm failing people, but your words reminded me that showing up still matters. Thank you for showing up." Keanu folded the letter gently and placed it beside Layla's bracelet. He opened another, this one from a father in Arizona, who wrote, "My son was placed in foster care after I lost my job and housing. I didn't think anyone saw me after that, until I saw you speak." Letter by letter, face by face, the pain and the purpose came together like pieces of a puzzle only visible from a distance. By the time the team arrived an hour later, Keanu was already at the whiteboard, writing quietly. Not slogans, not revenge. Ideas, real plans. He didn't speak right away, just nodded as the team filtered in. Sophia took one look at him and could tell he had gone somewhere hard the night before, but he had returned with something deeper. Malik gave him a small nod of solidarity. No words, no need. Keanu stepped back from the board. "We're not fixing pain," he said. "We're facing it, with policy, with presence, with persistence." He turned back to the team. "From this point forward, everything we do has to be for someone like Layla. Not in her memory alone, but in her name. She's not just why we cry, she's why we act." No one clapped. They just got to work, because doubt had come, and it had left behind something stronger than belief. Conviction. The idea came from a high school media class in Ohio. They had been studying political messaging and decided, without prompting, to create a video project inspired by Keanu's campaign. Their teacher gave them one instruction: make it honest. So the students sent out a prompt to friends, relatives, and strangers online. Finish this sentence: "I believe in Keanu because..." They expected maybe a few dozen responses. They received thousands. It started small. Local entries. A farmer in Indiana holding up a sign, "Because he reminds me of what decency looks like." A janitor in Atlanta standing in front of a middle school gym, "Because he never talks down to people like me." Then it spread. A jazz musician in New Orleans sent a black and white clip from his kitchen, "Because he listens like he's holding something sacred." A nurse in Montana, hair tied back after a 12-hour shift, looked into the camera with tired eyes and said, "Because he doesn't pretend the system isn't broken. He just shows up anyway." Each video was no longer than 10 seconds. Each one felt like a whisper that somehow carried the force of thunder. The students began stitching the clips together, state by state, story by story. No background music, no text overlays, just raw voices and the words that followed one simple phrase: "I believe in Keanu because..." An older couple from Vermont spoke together. Because he looks like the world has broken him, but he still chooses to care. A single mother from Arizona holding her baby. Because I've seen too many men walk away. He stayed. A disabled veteran from Wyoming, because when he says we, I believe him. Each entry added something different, not polished endorsements but personal echoes. And as the students stitched the clips into one master video, something extraordinary happened. It didn't feel like a campaign anymore. It felt like a collective reckoning, a mirror the country held up to itself and whispered, maybe it's not too late. When the video launched online, it was framed with only 2 lines of text. From all 50 states, from all walks of life, this is not a political ad, this is a reflection. And within hours, it was everywhere. The video spread faster than anyone expected. Within 24 hours, it had been shared by artists, athletes, nurses' unions, veterans groups, and high school debate teams. Not because it was viral, but because it was visceral. No studio lighting, no clever editing, just people saying what they felt. A barista in San Diego recorded herself between shifts, still in her apron, because he made space for people who've only ever been in someone else's shadow. A firefighter in upstate New York spoke in front of his truck because grief doesn't scare him, and neither does truth. A rabbi from Illinois, standing beneath stained glass windows, offered quietly, because leadership without humility isn't leadership. And he knows that. As the video continued to build momentum, the media tried to respond. Some called it a grassroots campaign masterpiece. Others tried to discredit it. This is emotion, not policy, one critic argued on a panel show. But that missed the point. This wasn't a political calculation. It was a spiritual response, a public exhale from a country that had held its breath for too long. And then, halfway through the video, came the clip that changed everything. It was Mariah, now 19, dressed in her favorite denim jacket, standing outside the youth center where Keanu had first met her. She looked straight into the camera, no script, no prompt cards. I believe in Keanu because he saw me before the world did. Her voice didn't shake, but the world did. That single sentence rippled through social media with force. People clipped it, shared it, quoted it in articles and comment threads. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was undeniable. He saw me before the world did. It became more than a tribute to Keanu. It became a litmus test, a quiet measure of what real leadership could feel like. Not dominance, but recognition. By the end of the video, it was clear. This wasn't about Keanu anymore. It was about the country people wanted to believe in again, a place where honesty was strength, where care wasn't political currency, where leadership started with presence, not performance. And perhaps most powerful of all, it was the people speaking, not in reaction to a platform, but in response to being seen. The night the video passed 10 million views, Keanu watched it alone. He sat at the edge of his desk, arms crossed, the screen glowing in the dark room. One voice after another, no speeches, no slogans, just truth, steady and unstoppable. By the time Mariah's clip came on, he'd already heard it half a dozen times. But this time, it broke something open. He didn't cry. He just sat still and whispered, "Thank you." Sophia entered quietly with a printout of the latest analytics, but when she saw the screen, she stopped. "Again?" He nodded. She set the papers down without a word and sat beside him. Malik joined them minutes later, holding 2 mugs of tea. No one needed to speak, because something had shifted, and they all felt it. This was no longer a campaign. This was a calling. The video wasn't about admiration. It was about recognition. People weren't following Keanu because they saw a star. They were walking beside him because they saw themselves, reflected, respected, and finally heard. And as the night deepened, something else became clear. The movement wasn't building toward him. It was building outward, from every voice, every whisper, every story. It didn't need headlines anymore. It had found its own heartbeat. They held the town hall in Cincinnati, not because it was strategic, but because it was honest. The community center had peeling paint and creaky floors. Folding chairs were arranged in long arcs. No stage, no spotlight, just people and a mic on a stand, surrounded by mismatched rugs to absorb the echo. Keanu arrived quietly. No motorcade, no entourage, just Malik driving a borrowed van and Sophia carrying a clipboard with handwritten notes. The crowd was bigger than expected. Families filled the seats. Elders leaned forward with clasped hands. Teenagers sat cross-legged at the front. The room was thick with warmth and grief and the quiet ache of people hoping, one last time, that someone would tell them the truth. Keanu didn't wear a suit. He wore jeans and a dark sweater. No branding, no lapel pin, just the bracelet Layla had once tied to his wrist. The audience rose to their feet when he stepped forward, but he gently motioned for them to sit. "Tonight's not about applause," he said softly. "It's about each other." There was no teleprompter, just a small table beside him with a glass of water and a notebook he never opened. He began with a sentence that silenced every phone and whispered side conversation. "I didn't come here to be the voice of the people," he said. "I came to make room for the people's voices." Then he stepped back and invited others forward. First was Devon, a former foster youth now working as a mechanic. He spoke about the day he aged out of the system and had nowhere to sleep. "What hurt most wasn't that I didn't have a home," he said. "It's that no one noticed." Then came Teresa, a doctor from West Virginia, who described what it was like to treat children in rural clinics without access to antibiotics. "I can save a child's life with one pill," she said, "but some nights, we don't have that pill." After her came Mariah. She stood tall, wearing the same denim jacket from her video, and looked out at the audience with clear eyes. "I used to think being seen was enough," she said. "But being seen is just the beginning. After that, we have to be heard." The fourth guest was Tiana, a single mother who worked 2 jobs and still couldn't afford childcare. She didn't tell her story to draw pity. She told it so no one else would have to. Tiana's voice cracked once when she spoke about her daughter. "She asked me why I never sit down," she said, "and I told her it's because if I stop moving, we might fall behind. That's what poverty feels like. It's running and still sinking." The room was silent. Not the kind of silence that comes from not knowing what to say, but the kind that happens when everyone knows exactly what's being said, and they feel it too, deeply, to speak. Keanu stood to the side, not behind anyone, but beside them. He never interrupted. He never corrected. He let them hold the space. The final speaker was Luis, a young man who had grown up in 8 different foster homes, none of which he wanted to remember. He talked about what it meant to become an adult without being taught how to trust. "But someone told me that trust is a bridge," he said, "and sometimes we have to build it while walking across it. That's what I've been doing. That's what this feels like." The audience didn't clap. They just breathed deeper, like something tight in their chest had finally loosened. Keanu stepped forward again, slowly, gently. He looked at each person who had spoken and thanked them by name. Then he turned back to the audience. "This," he said, gesturing toward the space they had just created together, "is what leadership should look like." He let that sit. No polished speeches, no polished people, just truth. He glanced down, then back up. "And I don't think we need leaders who take up all the air in the room. I think we need ones who know when to pass the mic." He held up the mic and paused. "That's what tonight was about?" A man in the back whispered, "Amen." And that was when it happened. Not a standing ovation, not roaring applause. Tears go across the room. Soft sobs from people who hadn't been moved. They had been met. People who weren't waiting to be saved. They just wanted to be remembered. And somehow in this dimly lit room, with folding chairs and trembling voices, they were. Keanu didn't raise his arms. He didn't promise a plan in the next 100 days. He just stood there, quiet, listening, with the mic lowered by his side. Because the voices had already spoken. And for once, that was enough. After the town hall ended, no one rushed to leave. People lingered in small groups. Some hugged, others exchanged numbers. Several sat back down in their chairs, not because they were waiting for more, but because they didn't want the moment to end. Keanu stayed. He shook every hand, listened to every question, and thanked every voice. Outside the center, reporters waited. Cameras were lined up along the sidewalk, ready for a statement. Keanu walked past them without speaking. His message had already been delivered. Inside them, later that night, clips from the event began circulating. They weren't the usual political highlights. They were quiet snapshots. Luis wiping his eyes after speaking. Tiana gripping the microphone with both hands. Mariah standing steady, her voice strong and certain. One headline the next morning read, "The town hall that made America cry." But the people who were there knew it wasn't just about tears. It was about truth, about what happens when someone running for the highest office in the country decides to run beside people instead of in front of them. The town hall wasn't a performance. It was a turning point. From that day forward, the campaign wasn't seen as unconventional. It was seen as necessary. And it all started because someone passed the mic and meant it. The invitation came wrapped in prestige. A national debate, televised live, moderated by a former news anchor, hosted in a historic concert hall in Washington, D.C. The kind of venue where chandeliers hang from hand-carved ceilings and marble lines every corridor. The kind of place designed to echo power. Keanu read the proposal in silence. He looked at the gold-embossed header, the carefully worded promise of media reach, and the projected viewership numbers, over 40 million. Then he turned to Sophia and said, "We'll do it." Malik raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" Keanu nodded. "But on one condition." They waited. He set the envelope on the table. "We don't do it there." Sophia blinked. "Where do you want to hold it?" "A public school," he said. "Auditorium, folding chairs, fluorescent lights." Malik leaned back, grinning. "Now that feels right." The organizers pushed back. They called it a security issue, a logistics nightmare, a mistake in messaging. Keanu didn't budge. "This debate shouldn't happen in a place where the walls cost more than most people's annual salaries," he said. "It should happen where truth is taught, even if the windows stick and the mics buzz." After 2 days of negotiation, they agreed. The debate would take place at an aging high school in Columbus, Ohio. The stage was built in the 70s. The sound system rattled. The floor creaked with every step, but the moment felt right. The morning of the debate, Keanu sat in the library with Sophia and Malik, reviewing nothing. No note cards, no attack lines, no strategy. Just reminders. "Speak from your gut," Malik said. "Let the silence work for you," Sophia added. "You don't need to fill every second." Outside, students filed into bleachers beside families, teachers, and union workers. There were no box seats, no velvet ropes, just tape on the floor and creaking risers. When Keanu stepped out, he wore what he always wore: dark jeans, a plain jacket, and the same bracelet with Layla's name. The moderator gave a quick welcome. The other candidate made their opening remarks, polished, direct, filled with numbers and practiced pauses. Then it was Keanu's turn. He stepped to the microphone. He looked at the faces in front of him, faces that didn't usually get to sit this close to national power. And then he said, "This isn't about me winning. It's about making sure none of us lose each other again." The moderator froze. And the audience? They stood. The applause didn't come right away. Instead, there was a stillness. Not silence born of confusion, but one born of awe. The kind that falls when someone says something so painfully honest, it hits before it registers. Then, slowly, people stood. not in a coordinated wave, but in scattered reverence. One teacher, then a student, then an elderly man who had limped in with the help of his granddaughter. They rose as if pulled up by a common thread. The moderator stumbled through the next question. What would your first 100 days in office look like? Keanu didn't speak in bullet points. He spoke in pictures. In the first 100 days, he said, I want to meet the people who weren't invited to the table before. The janitors who clean Capitol floors at night. The caregivers who haven't slept in weeks. The farmers whose land we paved over and forgot. He paused. In the first 100 days, I want to replace the word agenda with the word reminder. That our job is not to impress each other. His opponent fired back with strong rebuttals, charts, economic stats, sharp lines, clearly practiced. Keanu nodded as they spoke, listening fully, even when criticized. And then, when it was his turn again, he said something no one expected. You're not wrong, he said, looking across at his opponent. But right now, being right isn't enough. People aren't looking for who can speak louder. They're waiting to see who will kneel beside them. The moderator blinked. Mr. Reeves, are you suggesting your campaign is more moral than practical? Keanu smiled gently. I'm suggesting that practicality without compassion becomes cruelty in a suit. The audience murmured. One of the students in the front row mouthed, Whoa. The debate continued, but something had shifted. The typical rhythm, question, answer, counter, gave way to something more reflective. People stopped waiting to be entertained and started leaning in. A mother of 3 stood during the audience Q&A. My son has autism, she said. He can't speak. But he watches you on YouTube, and when you smile, he smiles back. So I need to ask, if you win, will kids like mine matter every day, not just during speeches? Keanu didn't hesitate. They already do, he said, but I'll make sure the system remembers too. There was no sound in the room but a sharp exhale and a single sob. This was no longer about parties. This was about the promise of being seen. As the final question was asked, the lights buzzed softly overhead. Why should the American people trust you? The moderator asked. Keanu paused, not to calculate, but to feel the weight of the question. Because I'm not asking for your trust, he said. I'm earning it with every step I take and every promise I don't rush to make. I've sat in silence with people who've lost everything. I've held hands with the forgotten. And the truth is, the people don't need a savior. They need someone who won't flinch when things get hard. He stepped slightly forward. And if I'm not the one who can deliver that, then I want the person who can to be lifted up by this movement. That's what leadership should be. A relay, not a throne. The room didn't erupt. It breathed. A collective inhaling of something deeper than applause, something more lasting than a poll bump. Outside the auditorium, a group of students had been watching through a live stream projected on a wall. When Keanu finished, they didn't cheer. They began picking up the trash from the field behind them. No one told them to. They just understood the moment wasn't about being heard, it was about responding. Inside, Keanu stepped down from the mic. The moderator called for closing statements, but the room had already closed its own. This wasn't a debate. It was a decision. Not for the country, but for the soul of the conversation itself. And for the first time in years, people didn't leave wondering who won. They left wondering what they were going to do next. The sun hadn't fully risen when Keanu returned to the youth center. The boarded-up windows were still there, like tired eyelids refusing to open. The paint had chipped further since his last visit. A gust of wind stirred a paper cup down the sidewalk. The world was quiet, as if it too had paused to consider what came next. But this time, something was different. The steps leading up to the locked front door were covered in color. Note, dozens of them, maybe more. Folded paper, crayon drawings, torn notebook sheets, messages written on receipts and napkins, some taped to the door. Others weighed down with stones. Keanu stopped halfway up the stairs. He crouched, hands in his pockets, eyes tracing the trail of voices left behind. One note read, "I found housing. You helped me believe I deserved it." Another, "Tell Mariah she changed everything." And another, "My son watched your town hall and asked, 'Is that what a president sounds like?' I told him no, but maybe now it is." Keanu knelt, the morning light warming his back. He took in each one, letting the words settle in his chest like rainfall after a long drought. No cameras, no headlines, just a man reading the echoes of a movement that had grown far beyond him. Sophia had told him earlier that week that the numbers were exploding. The campaign didn't have the most money, but it had the most momentum, the most volunteers, the most online engagement, the most emotion. But Keanu didn't see metrics when he looked at these notes. He saw people. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded paper of his own, one he'd written the night after the debate, sitting in the quiet, with a pen that kept pausing, from his hand shaking. He unfolded it, placed it near the top step, and weighted it with a smooth river stone. His note read, "Still listening." Then he stood, looked once more at the door, and turned to walk down the steps. The sky behind him was warming from gray to amber. The sidewalk stretched ahead like a story still being written. As Keanu walked down the block, the city began to stir. He passed a bus stop where an older woman with a shopping cart full of cans gave him a nod. She didn't call his name, didn't ask for anything, just nodded, the way people do when they recognize something deeper than celebrity. He nodded back. A man sweeping the front of a corner market paused and said, "Keep going, brother. We've been waiting for someone who didn't disappear." Keanu thanked him quietly and kept moving. Half a block later, he passed a row of 3 teens painting a mural on the side of a rec center. It wasn't flashy, just words in block letters outlined in chalk, soon to be painted in. "We're not waiting to be seen. We're seeing each other." He smiled and gave them a thumbs up. One of them called out, "We watched the debate in class. Our teacher cried." Another added, "I think we're going to vote. First time." Keanu raised a hand in acknowledgement, heart full. When he turned the corner, the camera team waiting at HQ saw him approach from a distance. Sophia met him at the door, files in hand. "We've got morning interviews lined up, the next round of rallies is booking out, and the next state wants a town hall next week." Keanu nodded but didn't rush inside. He stood for a second longer on the sidewalk and looked at her. "Can we keep doing this our way?" he asked. "Even if it gets harder?" Sophia didn't hesitate. "We have to." Malik opened the door behind them. "If it gets harder, that's proof it's working." Keanu took a breath, then stepped inside. The office was alive with motion. Calls happening, graphics being built, emails flying, volunteers checking in from everywhere. But even in the noise, the feeling hadn't changed. This wasn't a machine. It was a movement. And it was walking forward, not in Keanu's name, but in its own name. Voiceover. "We're not running for power, we're walking toward each other." Across the screen, the images shifted. Mariah laughing with young students at a community center. Lewis helping build a bridge at a foster home campus. Anita embracing a mother she once helped reunite with her son. Faces, not logos. Stories, not slogans. The people weren't looking for a savior. They were becoming the story. And Keanu, he was still listening. Later that evening, as the day settled into gold and dusk, the campaign team posted a message across all platforms. It wasn't a donation link. It wasn't an announcement. Just one question. Would you vote for someone who never wanted to run, only to serve? Tell us below. The comments came in fast. From truckers, teachers, cancer survivors, teenagers who weren't even eligible to vote yet, from nurses who had lost sleep and fathers who had lost faith. People didn't just comment, they poured their truth into it. One read, "Finally someone who doesn't speak from a stage, but from the floor where we've all been waiting." Another, "I used to think no one like me could be part of politics, but if he's in, maybe I'm in too." And pinned at the top was a second prompt. What story should we tell next in Keanu's journey? Drop your idea, we're listening. Suggestions flooded in. Stories of veterans, youth shelters, immigration, second chances, redemption, loss, rebuilding. Everyone had something they needed to be heard. And the campaign, no, the chorus, was built on one unshakable promise: to keep listening. As the final clip of the day played out across social media, it showed Keanu walking through a field at sunrise, arms loose at his side, a soft wind blowing through the tall grass. No words, just movement. Then a simple line appeared. Keanu thought announcing his run was the hard part, but what comes next will test everything he stands for. And with that, the screen faded to black. Not with a conclusion, but with a question. What happens when a country stops waiting for permission and begins to walk together? That's where the next chapter begins. And so will we.